On today's episode of the podcast, I'll be sharing with you my modified family knit work socks, as well as a favor knit that I'm doing for my mom, which is the Braided Hearts beanie. And if you stick around to the end, I have a bone to pick with a particular pattern that I really want to chat about with you. So if all that sounds like your cup of tea, grab your knitting, something cozy to drink, and let's get started. Hello, and welcome to episode 66 of the Wool Needles Hands Knitting Podcast. My name is Taylor, and I will be your host. I have some things to share with you guys today, as well as a bone that I have to pick with a particular pattern that I'm using right now, and I want to share that with you at the end of the episode, so definitely stick around for that. But before we get started, I just have a couple of admin things to get out of the way. First thing I wanted to mention was that the first edition of the Wool Needles Hands newsletter went out on the 1st of December. I intended on having it out the last day of November and things kind of got crazy, so it went out the 1st of December, but it was really cool to get it out to you guys. It's kind of serving the purpose of a monthly rundown with a forecast of what episodes are coming to the channel the following month. It's just a really nice way to keep in touch with you guys. I loved the feedback that I got from a lot of you guys in my inbox. It was so heartwarming. I'm thrilled that there are so many of you signing up for the newsletter and that you enjoyed the first edition of the newsletter. It is a working operation. I'm not sure how I'm going to be formatting the newsletter moving forward, but I kind of like how I had it formatted this first time. So I'm just excited to have you here and to have a newsletter go out to you guys once a month, giving you a rundown of what I've been doing here over the course of the last month. Things, of course, that I chat about here on the episodes of the podcast, but other little tidbits as well. If you would like to sign up for the newsletter, head over to the Wool Needles Hands website, which is linked down below in the description box. You can also find it in the About section of the YouTube channel. Sign up for the newsletter. Your email is completely safe. I don't advertise anything outside of just what we're doing here on the Wool Needles Hands YouTube channel and all things related to Wool Needles Hands. It is very much just an update newsletter, and I would love to have you join. Also, if you are a regular viewer and subscriber of the channel and you would like to help support the work that I'm doing here, definitely check out the Wool Needles Hands merch shop. We have lots of cute shirts, kind of like this cuff down t-shirt. We have team cuff down and toe up as well, plus a lot of other fun conversation starters over there as well. Your support via the Wool Needles Hands merch website is very, very much appreciated. Definitely head over and check it out. You can find direct links down below this video. You might even be able to see photos of the various different products, but again, all links are down below. Okay, let's go ahead and dive right in. I have two projects to share with you guys today. I have been very busy this last week decorating for Christmas, doing festive things with the kids as we move into December. So it's just been a busy, bustling week. And so I haven't made a ton of I actually take that back. It's not that I've not made a ton of progress. It's that I've been pretty monogamous on my family knit work socks, which, you know what, let's make that the first thing that I share with you guys today, because this has just been a pleasure to knit on. It's the one thing that I've been reaching for. I just want to get them finished so that my husband can wear them. Yeah, so this has just kind of been my exclusive knit over the course of the last week when I've had some downtime. I was under the weather. I'm still getting my voice back. It's ridiculous. But I was under the weather, and so knitting just didn't feel that great. So I wasn't knitting as often as I usually do. So this has been kind of there for me as my comfort knit lately. And so I've made a lot of progress. Now, as I talk about these, keep in mind, and you'll be able to see, obviously, I'm knitting these two at a time. So I just kind of embarked, I just kind of started down the road of knitting two at a time just recently with these and a pair of fire pit mitts that I knit and I shared with you guys in a previous episode of the podcast. And I am so loving the process. I just think that it's nice to see two large socks come together at the exact same time. I'm going to be honest with you. My husband has size 13 feet. He's 6'5", giant feet. And so knitting a pair of socks for him is like knitting the sleeves to a small sweater. Like, it's a lot of knitting. And so the idea or the thought of knitting one of these and then knowing you're going to have to knit a whole nother one afterwards, I get really bad second sock syndrome, and that kind of triggers that for me. So watching these come together, albeit somewhat slowly, but come together at the same time has been absolutely fulfilling. If you have not tried knitting socks two at a time, Or let's say that you've tried it in the past and maybe just didn't have the most comfortable experience, or it was kind of fiddly. I encourage you to try it again with a pair of worsted weight socks, something that's gonna knit up a little bit faster just anyway, and just see if you can get back into the rhythm. And also not expecting yourself to knit them faster, just to be more satisfied at seeing them come together at the same time. I think that's the appeal of knitting 2 at a time. It's not necessarily that you're going to get the pair of socks done faster. It's just that you're going to get them done at the same time and move on. And I think that that's worth any kind of delay in how long it takes you to knit them. So all that to be said, I have made progress on these. I'm loving the process of knitting these. Now, these are a modified version of the Yarnspirations pattern, the family knit work socks. If you're familiar with that pattern, you'll be able to see that I have obviously modified it. Not only in the striping and the color that goes into the cuff, but the fact that my ribbed cuff is only about 3.5 inches long, and then the rest of the sock is just a plain stockinette. I'm also not doing a heel flap and gusset. I chose to do a short row heel, and I'm using the no wrap, no gap short row heel technique, and I will link to that down below in the description box. Love it. It makes knitting a short row heel a breeze. It's great. So that is what I have going on here. And now I'm in the process of just finishing up the foot. And for the toe, I'll be doing this kind of black yarn color for the toe as well. So these are my family knit work socks, patterned by Yarnspiration, linked down below. I'm knitting these primarily in Lion Brand Fisherman's Wool, because we all love some Fisherman's Wool, as we know if we watch my channel. And I'm pairing that with Fiber for the People yarn in the organic merino worsted, in the leather colorway and the sable colorway, and that's my contrasting colors. So I decided to modify these kind of based on my husband's preference. He had mentioned to me that he doesn't really love to have an entirely ribbed sock. He kind of likes the idea of having some good ribbing at the top to hold the sock up, but that the rest of the sock, he liked the idea of it just being a plain stockinette fabric. And I'm into that. I think that makes for a really nice and cozy sock. And honestly, like, it just means that I don't have to rib for as long as I would have had to have ribbed for a size 13 foot. So I'm okay with that. So these are going to be super cozy. And as I'm knitting them, the squish factor is out of this world. You guys, it is just squishy and amazing, and it feels so rustic and woolly. These feel like if some shop were selling these exact socks, they would be super expensive. They just feel luxurious, and so I can't wait for him to have these for his tootsies to keep him warm, because he wears socks every night when we sit down on the couch to watch TV. He's always slipping some socks on after putting on his healthy feet foot lotion. He puts the socks on over the top of that, it's the whole thing. But this will be good for him, keeping his toes warm. So these are my family knit work socks. The pattern is by Yarnspirations. Now, know that when you go to check out the pattern, I love that pattern. This is modified, so this isn't going to look exactly like that, but I love that pattern. Highly recommend it, and it's free, so it's kind of a bonus. And I recommend using Lion Brand Fisherman's Wool if you haven't tried it before. It's a fantastic budget rustic yarn, and I talk all about budget rustic yarns in the video that I will link down below in my Budget to Bougie series. I talk about this there as well. So shout out to Lion Brand Fisherman's Wool. But loving these, highly recommend it. Gonna finish these off. I'm hoping to have these finished by the next time we chat. Okay, the next project that I want to share with you is actually a favor knit that I'm doing for my mom. My mom is watching. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. I decided I would knit this hat for her. She was sharing some ideas that she was having about gift knits, and there was one in particular, and actually, she's kind of got a lot of gift knits going on, and I could tell that she was a little bit crunched for time in terms of getting them all done. And she shared this one particular pattern with me that she was planning on knitting for the daughter or the granddaughter of a really dear friend of hers. And I could just sense that it was going to, like I said, kind of make her pressed for time and getting everything done. And I suggested that I knit it for her because it's a super bulky pattern, and I can work those up really fast. And after seeing the pattern, I was thinking, like, I've got the yarn for this. It looks super squishy and cozy. It's not a pattern I would ever knit for myself, but I love the pattern and I want the excuse to knit that. So anyway, all that is to say that I am knitting a hat for my mom for her to gift for Christmas. And this is the Braided Hearts beanie. And I want to make sure that I get the name of the designer correctly. And it is, yeah, the Braided Hearts beanie designed by Yarn It All by Jill. I will provide the links down in the description box for this, both the Etsy link and the Ravelry link if you're interested. But it's a really pretty, I'll pop pictures up. As you can see here, it's really squishy and textured with that nice braided design running up the hat. And so it's something, like I said, I would not knit this for myself because I just wouldn't wear a hat like that because it's just too big. But it looks so scrumptious to knit and to squish and all of that. So I jumped right on board on knitting this for my mom, and I'm happy that I did. But as you'll see it after I share this with you, I do have a bone to pick with this pattern and kind of patterns that use this particular technique. I'll share what I'm talking about particularly towards the end. So stick around for that. But here is what I have so far of the Braided Hearts beanie. I'm knitting this in a kind of a new yarn that I'm sampling for the shop. I'm thinking about bringing it. It's super special and fantastic. Just so scrumptious and squishy. I'm going to kind of give you a chance to look. I'm losing light outside, so it might be a little dark. And this is the Mama's Lipstick colorway by Fiber for the People. This was a colorway I just featured in the shop on Saturday. Really lovely, beautiful, dark aubergine. As you can see here, it's super dark. But I'm loving the texture in this color. And look at that gorgeous yarn. Look at how squishy it is, the fiber, the halo that it gives off. This is a 70% baby alpaca, 7% fine merino. So there's no superwashing going on here. And then it also has a 23% recycled nylon content. And it's really lovely. And I know I say that all the time about a lot of different things, but I mean it with this. It's really a fantastic yarn. It has that lovely fibery floofiness of a Surrey alpaca, but you get that woolly feeling of a nice fine merino, like a real low micron count merino. And then you've got some durability and structure in there with the nylon that would otherwise kind of be lacking if it was just all alpaca. There would be a little bit of that lack of resiliency as a characteristic of alpaca in general. And so you've got a good percentage of nylon in there, giving it that durability, that resiliency, and I think that's really great. So again, this is a trial yarn. I'm not 100% sure if I am going to be bringing it into the Fiber for the People shop, or if I am, when I will be. And I want to run it through its paces before I make that decision, but so far I'm really loving it. This is my cake. Let's see here. Ugh. It's so beautiful. I think I'll have a better idea of how I would want to incorporate this in the shop after I complete the hat. It's actually considered a bulky weight. It is a single ply and it comes in skeins of 284 yards per 100 grams. And 284 yards per 100 grams is a really generous amount of yarn for a bulky weight yarn. I'm knitting this holding 2 strands together to make up that super bulky weight that I need for the hat pattern, but single, so here you can see, just to show 2 strands together, you can see the individual strands and then you can see, together they make a good super bulky weight right there. But it's really lightweight too. It's not dense at all. It's not too airy. It's definitely nothing like a pencil roving where you feel like you're gonna break it if you pull on it. Nothing like that. There's durability there and strength. But that being said, it does kind of give you that vibe, that aesthetic of like a pencil roving or a plotalope, but obviously with 0 scratch factor. There's only a small amount of actual wool in here. So you don't have, if you're kind of sensitive to wool, it might not be as much of an issue. If you're allergic to wool, that's different. But if you're just thinking that you don't want any scratch, this is definitely, this is great for that. There's no scratch factor at all, but you do get that kind of chunky, rustic earthiness of like a plotalope with the softness of an alpaca. So yeah, I don't know. I'm considering that. I'm thinking it might be something I bring to the shop. We shall see. But that is my Braided Hearts beanie that I'm knitting for my mom for her to gift for Christmas. Now, like I said, I do have a bone to pick with this pattern, and this is not a jab at the designer of this pattern. This is a really lovely design. I think that it's very beautiful. I think that it's a very wearable hat, and I think it's a very simple knit. And creating that texture is a walk in the park. It's very, it's easy. But there's something that is in the wording of the pattern, and it's not just this pattern, I see it in other patterns as well, that just kind of rubs me the wrong way, because I feel like it's something that requires clarification, and I think that it's something that is relying or assuming that the knitter knows what it is you're going for. Okay, before I talk that to death, what it is slipping a stitch. Now, when you slip a stitch from the left needle to the right needle, there's a few things that are going to happen depending on how you slip that stitch. And when you're reading knitting instructions, and without giving anything away in the pattern, the instructions in this pattern say literally slip one. Okay, it just says slip one. Now, typically when you see a slip stitch instructions, well, I don't know if it's typically, but a lot of times when you see slip stitch instructions, it'll say slip stitch with the yarn in front, slip stitch with the yarn in back, slip stitch as if to knit, slip stitch as if to purl. And all of these designations or additional kind of clarification of how you're supposed to be slipping that stitch is going to impact the final fabric. It's going to impact your stitch pattern that you have on the piece that you're working. When that's not clarified in a pattern and all it says is slip one, there's a lot that's being assumed. You're assuming that the knitter knows to slip it through the front or slip it through the back. You're assuming that the knitter knows to slip it with the yarn in front or slip it with the yarn in back. You're making a lot of assumptions because you're not clarifying. And nowhere on this pattern, in the actual pattern that you purchase and receive, nowhere on it does it clarify what slip one refers to. And a lot of times in a pattern, it'll say in the notes of the pattern, slip one, and what that means. It could say, make sure every time you slip your stitch, you're slipping it with the yarn in front or with the yarn in back, or you're slipping through the front loop or slipping through the back loop. All of these things will be clarified at some point in the pattern, and nowhere in this pattern is that clarified. And that's frustrating because I know that you could very well go to the commentary section on Ravelry about this pattern and try to find somebody who's asked this question, but I don't think you should have to do that. I think that that should be clarified in the notes section of the pattern, especially for a hat with this kind of texture, because the design, the stitch pattern that you see in this hat, I believe, and I'm not 100% certain because I have not tried knitting this hat using all the different ways that you can slip a stitch, but I'm pretty certain that this stitch pattern relies on you slipping the stitch as if to knit. So slipping the stitch by sticking your needle into the stitch like you're going to knit it and slipping it onto the right needle. My hat shows, you can see the stitch design in there. You can see that braid. And it's really pretty. And my gauge is not off. My gauge is close to spot on for this hat. But what I noticed between my hat and the hat that showed the pictures is that my braid looks a little bit looser. Now, this is not a problem. I like the way this looks, and I'm not going to go back and change this because I've already knit this twice. What you see here, I've knit twice. And I'll tell you why I knit it twice in just a second. But this time, I'm noticing that it's looser. It looks looser than it does in the image. And that's because I am slipping the stitches as if to purl. Because when you slip a stitch, generally speaking, if you are going to just assume, you usually are just taking that stitch from the left needle right onto the right needle without adjusting its orientation, meaning you're not twisting it, you're just moving it right over. And that's what I did because nothing was specified here for how to slip it. So I just slipped it right over to the right needle without changing its orientation, without twisting it or anything. And this is what I have, and this is fine. However, I feel like if I were slipping that stitch as if to knit the stitch, meaning that I'm gonna twist the stitch as it moves over to the right needle, I think that this pattern that you're seeing here, this kind of braided pattern would be tighter. It would be a little bit more condensed, and it would look, I don't know if it would look tidier, but yeah, maybe it would look tidier and it would look more noticeable. But I didn't do it that way. And I made it this far in the design not doing it that way that I don't want to go back and do it that way now because I think there would be a noticeable difference. And I really don't want to take this out and do it all over again. That's frustrating. But what's even more frustrating is that I'm having this issue because it's not clarified in the pattern how you're supposed to slip that stitch. Which leads me to why I started the hat over in the first place. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, how to slip it either through the front loop or through the back loop, there's another way that you can slip stitches, and that's with the yarn in front or with the yarn in back. If you are familiar with sock knitting and knitting socks with a heel flap and gusset, typically when you are knitting that heel flap, well, not typically, but sometimes those heel flaps are knit with an alternating knit one, slip one kind of pattern, and you're slipping one with the yarn in front, which is giving you a little bit of an eye of partridge heel flap or a really nicely textured heel flap. That's what it does. When you slip a stitch with the yarn in front, like you're purling, you're going to create a different texture as opposed to if you're slipping the stitch with the yarn in back. Quite drastically different texture, especially when you're working with a size 13 needle and super bulky weight yarn. So the first time I knit this hat, when I got to the slip one, because the slip one is immediately followed by a purl, I slipped one with the yarn in front. Now, that to me was maybe something I could have thought through, and I could have assumed, like, perhaps I'm not supposed to put the yarn in front because that is something that seems like somebody would specify that, but I didn't. I just figured there's a purl right after that. I'm going to slip one with the yarn in front and assume that that's what I'm supposed to do. So I know what assuming says about people, I get it, whatever. But when I did that and I made the same progress that I have here, the pattern was way off because there's this strand of yarn in the front of your work that's being carried in front of your slip stitch because you're purling the next stitch. So you slip your stitch over and your yarn is in the front and you're carrying that yarn in front of that slip stitch to purl the next two stitches or whatever. And now you've got this loop on the front of your yarn that's not supposed to be there. It kind of looks like a float. And as I got through like about 6 rounds, I realized like, this is wrong. Like, what's going on? And I knew it had to be how I was slipping the stitch because there was always just this like little light bulb going off every time I would do that. Like, okay, am I doing this right? Am I slipping it the way that it's supposed to be slipped? Whatever. So I looked back at the pattern, realized it has to be the slip because everything else I'm doing correctly. So I took that out and I started over again and I started slipping the stitch with the yarn in back and moving forward that way. And I was seeing the pattern develop the way it was supposed to develop, albeit looser than what I was noticing, which is what led me to think I should also be slipping this as if to knit so that I'm twisting the stitch as it goes over, tightening up that little braided motif. So, you know, all this is to say that it bugs me when patterns assume a lot about what the knitter, how the knitter is going to read the pattern. Like it's assuming that the knitter is going to just read the mind of the designer and do the thing that it says to do the way that the designer intended it without any kind of clarification in the notes of the pattern. And it bugs me. Another area that happens is make one. Sometimes you'll see a make one, it'll just say, and this is actually very common and not quite as detrimental because you can make one just if you need to add stitches to a hat, if you're adding some shaping, it doesn't really matter how you make one. If you're only making it in one round or one row and it's not going to be a consecutive increase like on raglan seams where you kind of want the stitches to slant a certain way, it doesn't really matter too much. But a lot of times they don't specify it. And that's like, it's not as much of a beefy issue that I have, but it's another one of those things. It's like you kind of wish there was a little bit of a specification in the notes section. Like every time you see make one to the left or make one to the right or make a neutral stitch because there is a way to make a neutral leaning increase. So all of these things. So let me know your thoughts on that. It is something that comes up. Slip one drives me nuts though when it happens because there is a big difference depending on the different ways that you slip that stitch. Now, this is not to say that you should not download this pattern because it is a beautiful hat. And you should. If you want a really quick, chunky knit to knit as a gift for somebody this Christmas, this is an excellent one. It's a pricier pattern. It's $6.50, so take that for what it is. But I'm not saying you shouldn't download this pattern. I'm not saying that you shouldn't support this designer. I'm just saying that these are things that bug me. These are the reasons why sometimes I might get in touch directly with a designer to say, hey, like, can you clarify how you want this stitch to be slipped? Because I do think that there's something getting lost in translation, or some folks might confuse how to do this, which might give them a fabric that's a little bit different than what you intended. whatever. I'm just here to provide you with a little bit of a constructive criticism about this pattern so that you know going forward, should you purchase this pattern, how to operate that slip one. And so I guess to culminate, my recommendation would be to slip it as if to knit and do it with the yarn and back. That would give you that really pretty braided texture in a nice, dense kind of construction, more so than what I'm having here, even though I'm not going to change this and I think it looks lovely. It would give you that kind of nice, concise, braided structure a little bit more effectively than the way that I'm doing it here. So yeah, that's it. That's my bone to pick. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comment section. Yeah, that is my Braided Hearts beanie by Yarn It All by Jill. That is it for me today, you guys. It has been lovely sharing my knits with you. I hope you've had a lovely weekend. I look forward to seeing you guys on the next episode of the Midweek Ramble, which is coming out on Wednesday. I'm going to be sharing with you my top 5 knitting fiber arts related podcasts or YouTube channels. You don't want to miss it. It'll be coming to you on Wednesday. Until then, happy making, happy knitting, happy whatever it is that you're doing. Take care, be well, and I will see you soon. Bye.